105-99, 18.7 seconds left.
The Knick defense stifling today, as expected. The Pacer offense not disciplined enough, not hungry enough, not sharp enough to get Reggie Miller the shots he needs, to get Derek McKee the ball where he needs it so he can take shots other than fading to his left across the key.
Underway, Houston and Utah tied at 2 early. We'll be going there at the conclusion of this game. Game that's seen nearly 60 fouls called. Actually, that is short of the record for both teams in a playoff game. Miller for 3, and he got it. Reggie Miller with a clutch tray, and it's 105-102. And a steal. Miller retreats to the three-point line.
Tie game. No need to foul in that situation.
And the foul is called with 13.2 seconds. Reggie Miller made a 3.
Let's kill that bastard now, man. Let's do it for Tommy.
What the hell is this shit about?
He killed my brother, man.
It's all right. We'll get him. I know it hurts.
He messed with the wrong niggas, brother. All quick as mine. Pull up to his bumper, we'll blow his head off.
Junior, you okay? Junior! Junior! Oh, shit! Junior dead in the motherfucker! You shot Junior in the back of the head!
It was a mistake, man. Shit! But I'm next to that motherfucker.
Oh, shit!
Shut up, it was a mistake.
Damn, Junior dead!
It was an accident, Junior. I'm sorry.
Shit.
I'm sorry, Junior.
Oh,
Catch that motherfucker now.
Junior!
I'm sorry, Junior.
Oh, shit! Shut the fuck up! You always crying, motherfucker! Nigga, did you know what he said? Get next door! Get next door! Come on! Come on!
You made me kill Junior. You ain't shit. You dead, motherfucker. I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get you, motherfucker. Hold on, Jesus. Stop the fucking car!
Stop the car!
Shit! Sneaky motherfucker, let's get him!
of head. And I know you had something to do with what happened to my brother, Quick.
Yo, man, I don't know what you're talking about.
That's bullshit, man. You know what I'm talking about.
You broke my nose, man. Yo, man, I'ma say it one more time. I don't know what the fuck y'all are talking about, and I suggest y'all let me go on my way.
Oh, really? Oh, really? I suggest you kiss my ass, Quick. Only way you going home is shot, motherfucker. What the hell you think you're doing with that little shit? Stop it! Stop it! Don't shoot that little motherfucker no more! Fuck this. Asshole.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Thanks. What's happening? Go on, Angelina. How's your brother? Hey, what are you doing? Go on, get out of here. You both. Ain't you got anything better to do? All right. Listen, sweetheart, this is my territory. I don't want no trouble, or you're going to get wasted, see?
The wind mob, Joe.
Yeah, wind mob. All right. Big man. You know what I do to squealers? I get them in the belly. Ah. All right. Hey, Tonto. What's happening, Kimasabi? Hey, you see any cavalry out there?
We see no pale faces.
Is that right, Kimasabi? Hey, you got something in your ear here. Hey! Hey, I want to see $35 in this machine this week, or I'm going to break your fingers. 1 by 1. Hey, this ain't my machine.
Joey eyeballed a good-looking waitress. "Hello, Mama," and motioned to the back, saying, "I don't want to talk no business till we've had a feast. Let's go to the rear, where we'll have more room." Teddy walked under Mount Vesuvius. Joey chatted up the bartender and paid respects to Mama Luna. The waiter offered several good bottles of wine, Chianti Rufino at $4 a bottle, or Asti Spumante at $6.50. Mike tasted. Teddy didn't want to drink anything. He sipped his water. "Go ahead, have something," said Joey. "You'll feel better. They have good steak here. It's nice when everybody has a buck in their pockets. It's good to eat steak. It's not good for anybody to go hungry. What do you think, Mike? Live and let live?" "Yeah." Joey turned to Teddy. "Don't you agree?" "I believe in live and let live. Let everybody go out and work for a living." Teddy picked at his shrimp cocktail. Mike and Joey dug into steaks. Both agreed the food here was much better than in the joint. In the middle of the meal, Joey and Mike headed into the kitchen. The cooks chopped garlic, poured in the olive oil, and stirred the rich sauce. Teddy felt the heat on the back of his neck. The whole place seemed to be in cahoots with Joey, except for the 3 undercover cops sitting behind Teddy. They looked out of place. They looked like cops. Joey and Mike came back and polished off the steak, enjoying every bite. "Joe, I don't want anything to do with this thing. My wife is hysterical. She's scared." "Did we go through that yesterday and we have to go through it again?" snapped Joey. "What gives with this kid? What is he, stupid?" Se ha bisogno di un po' di tempo per pensarci, lo mandiamo in ospedale per 4-5 mesi, giusto il tempo per pensarci. Take it easy, said Mike. Joey stormed off. They are awfully annoyed, said Mike. They are not fooling around. You know what he said to me? No? That if you need some time to think it over, they'll put you in the hospital for 4 or 5 months, and that'll give you some time. Listen, Teddy, I spent 9 hours with these guys last night. They are not kidding. I don't know. Look, I just want peace. I've had enough of this 9 years ago. I just want peace. Fate had sucked Mike away from the clean life. Now he would live dirty. He would wake up late, go to the track, and live off women, and felt the best thing for Teddy was to throw in the sponge, too. Joey came back and called for the check. Did your wife know you were coming down here? The place is crawling with cops. Joey's boys, stationed throughout the Luna, sprung into action. One ran into the kitchen, grabbed a waiter's jacket, removed glasses and dishes from the tables, and slipped off. Mike followed Joey onto Mulberry and waited for Teddy, who walked out and headed in the other direction. Mike grabbed his arm and pulled. Come on, said Mike. Everything is all right. I'm with you. Mike, I'm not going down that way. If you don't want to go, spat Joey, just leave him. The cops came in for the kill. The bartender ran out at the commotion. Mike had just enough time to spin around and hand over a big bill roll, which the bartender relayed to a waitress. She tossed it in the freezer box and slammed the door shut. Absurd deaths. Leaving Jackie's Chocolat on the back burner, Larry headquartered the family business, the newly incorporated direct vending machine company, in the storefront of 51 President Street, a 3-story brick tenement owned by his grandma Nunziato, right at the edge of the Red Hook waterfront. Having negotiated with the Vendall Company in Glen Cove, New York, manufacturers of prefix soda machines, to be their distributor in South Brooklyn and Long Island, Larry at last had the monopoly on teen rebellion, from the nickels plunked in the jukeboxes down to the sugary sodas sipped idly in the malt shops. Everything was set to make that transition into big business, to leave behind the life of a small-time gangster for good. But Joey couldn't give up the Udo act. He threatened to set the family back a few decades by putting the shakedown on Teddy Moss, a real nobody who didn't even know the reputation of the infamous Crazy Joe. The crime could land Joey 14 years in the joint. Mary had to mortgage her Flatbush home in order to post the 15 G's in bail. The Tombs was no good for her Joey. It made him jittery. His hands shook when he shaved. To raise the 25 G's for his lawyer fees, Joey gambled a chunk of money from his union insurance scheme, but came up short. He tried to borrow from underworld sources, but could only scrape together $50. Larry was in no position to help. After the NYPD got tipped off on the coup against Profazzi, 8 detectives dubbed the Pizza Squad took over a vacant apartment on President Street across from Gallo headquarters. The squad kept a close watch on Larry, making it tough for him to conduct business. He was so stretched thin on cash that he couldn't maintain the mortgage payments on his home. The repo man snatched his car. By order of the commission, old man Profazzi was supposed to come to a settlement with the Gallos, but Larry still hadn't seen a cent of that 150 G's the Gallos demanded for past hurts. Both parties were negotiating through John Simone, a used truck dealer who served as the Don's trusted bodyguard and chauffeur, valuable enough to be one of the hostages held at gunpoint during the coup. After 6 months of an uneasy peace and no breakthrough in negotiations, Simone called Larry and said he had some good news. Larry decided to meet him alone. His top gun, Joe Jelly, was off on a dirty weekend with his girl on the side after a deep-sea fishing trip in Sheepshead Bay. Larry put on his black jacket and pork pie hat and drove the loner to a South Brooklyn street corner for the meet. Simone was middle-aged, with thinning black hair. His long face was unusually cheery after a big day at the track. He forked over half his winnings as a good-faith token. Larry snatched up the crisp, folded-over C-note, trying hard not to look desperate. "Let's go to the Sahara Club and have a drink on it," said Simone. "Some of the boys will be there." Larry drove Simone to the Flatbush Cocktail Lounge and pulled into its small parking lot shortly before 3. The Sahara wasn't supposed to be open until 6 on Sunday due to the city's blue law. It was a Profazzi hangout. Larry followed Simone in through the side door. It was dark inside. The Doberman wasn't there, only the tubby bartender, Charlie Brown, polishing glasses by a dim bar light. A diamond stick pin twinkled from his tie. Larry knocked one back. Simone drank up and took a leak, leaving Larry to stare at his moon face in the mirror behind the bar. The surface was murky, covered under years of grime and cigarette smoke, or maybe being a Gallo brother had simply taken its toll on Larry. Hands emerged from the dark glass out of nowhere. Larry saw the reflection of a manila cord as it looped around his neck and pulled tight. He scratched at it, but his fingertips slid off. The rope twisted tighter, expertly pulled at the knotted ends. The garrote ripped back and forth across Larry's neck, sawing into his flesh, slow and methodical. Larry fell off the stool onto the floor. Always neat as a pin. He hated that everything spilled from his bowels. His heart stopped. The 8th Street bookshop was a haven for sanity in a world gone mad. On the pages of the Evergreen Review, paid for by ads from the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and the Russian Tea Room, the little magazine showcased the best of the counterculture, including chapters from Jean Genet's prison epic and poems by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. You're whirling around in your little hole, Fidel, and you'll soon sink in the course of human events. Hiding the bestsellers on the bottom shelves and showcasing insane poet Ezra Pound behind the enormous display windows, the haunt for village literati drew in a range of wanderers, from weird cowboy Jack Palance to strange gangster Joey Gallo checking out the fiction. "I read a lot of Camus," Joey told the clerk. In a bad omen to kick off the decade, the French novelist and philosopher Albert Camus was killed instantly on January 4, 1960, riding shotgun when his publisher swerved off the RN5 south of Paris and smashed his Facile Vega into a tree. With the death of Albert Camus, we reach a point of dying, mourned Howard Hart in his Village Voice tribute entitled, "Camus, the right side of our face has fallen off." Camus saw that even though everything might be destroyed, we must face the endemic hypocrisy in Western man. We must expose it. Camus did expose the lie. "See, my father must have really instilled on me," comic Lenny Bruce riffed on the mic, a village favorite ranting in underworld argot. "There's nothing worse than a lie. Yeah, sure, all of us, that's our generation. There's nothing worse than a lie. Just don't lie to me. So apparently my father wrapped it in solider than other people. So when I see the lie, I don't want it to be that way. You said that, do that, be the judge, and cool it. Don't get out of your cug completely. I can prove my innocence if I am able to get out into the street and get my witnesses together that are necessary to prove my innocence," Joey promised the judge in regard to the Teddy Moss case. "There is a lot in this case that is underground, and I think the district attorney is being hoodwinked by a smart operator. Through the squeeze, not knowing me, he put me into this swindle, Your Honor, and I can prove it if I am just given a week's time to get out into the street." Once he was freed, Joey was too busy to go underground and fix the trial. He needed to find his proper place in life. "After all," said Lenny Bruce, "there's nothing sadder than an aging hipster." Jeffy caved in and married Joey after he threatened to marry a nice Italian girl. Jean, the cat lady, was the bridesmaid. Baba was the best man. "What are you doing with that terrible man?" asked Jean. "Come on, Jean, leave him alone," said Joey. "This is my friend, my uncle, my father." Baba filled in for all who didn't show. The Gallo family didn't approve. "Everybody disapproved of the whole thing, including me by this time," said Jeffy. 2 days after her City Hall wedding, she was pregnant again, having lost her first baby in the wake of Miami. Grandma Nunziato listened to the news as she sat in her room on the 2nd floor of 51 President Street, headquarters of the Direct Vending Company. "One look at her," wrote columnist Jimmy Breslin, "told you that you were in the presence of greatness." silent in old country black, her iron-gray hair pulled back tight. Grandma Nunziata, or Big Mama, as the tabloids dubbed her, paved the way for Jeffy's entrance into the family. Her daughter Mary would have to love the gypsy whore. Jeffy was out the door for a Sunday visit at her sister-in-law's when she realized she'd forgotten her present, an electric tea kettle. Joey made her go back with him to get it. At 5.5 months, it was getting hard for Jeffy to schlep her baby belly up the 4 rickety flights into their record and book-strewn pad. The telephone was ringing off the hook. It was for Joey. Somebody at the Sahara. Joey picked up. A voice on the line croaked, "You're next on the list." The last person to identify Gallo triggerman Joe Jelly was his wife, Mrs. Jelly, who watched him waddle out the door with a black coat, black tie, and a white shirt over his squat body, covering the scar on his left shoulder. He looked as good as he'd ever look, ready for his upcoming dirty weekend in the country with his woman on the side. Jelly kissed the missus and stepped out of their Bensonhurst home. It was a scorcher, a dog day in August. The papers said the humidity was 1 point below the level where almost everybody should feel uncomfortable. Jelly slid onto the fine-grain Florentine leather of his gray Cadillac Imperial sedan with a big dent on the side. The AC cranked. The Imperial rode like a dream, keeping an even keel over the potholes. Jelly passed Rondazzo's on Emmons Avenue, where Don Carlo Gambino enjoyed the finest calamari and red sauce in the 5 boroughs. Jelly rolled off the leather seat of the Imperial, felt the breeze of Sheepshead Bay, and headed to the 32-foot-long cabin cruiser of his Marine buddy and crap game partner, Sally D., a chesty hulk who owned a little fruit stand on Avenue U. Jelly looked out to the vanishing strip of land, leaving behind the heat, the wife, and the best calamari and red sauce in the 5 boroughs. Jiggling with the waves, he breathed in the gasoline and fish smell as they trolled the open water. It was a great day to go deep-sea fishing. Somebody opened a frosty one from the cooler. The boys on the cabin cruiser chopped up Jelly, cut off his arms and legs, removed his innards, and stuffed the gutless torso in a barrel. They threw it overboard into the bay. According to informants, the barrel floated back up. They weighed it down further until it sunk. Jelly's gray, dented Cadillac was cut up at an auto parts store on Boston Road in the Bronx before getting crushed in an auto wrecking lot in Milford. Next on the hit parade was Larry Gallo, and it all went according to plan. Sally D. squeezed the life out of him, twisting the manila cord with a length of metal pipe, sawing it back and forth across the neck in the painful tradition of the Italian rope. Junior Persico allegedly watched. In the aftermath of the strangling, 2 members of the Gallo gang sat in a sleazy hotel, trying to figure out why Junior slunk so low as to set up Larry for the Shanghai at the Sahara. Junior and Larry knew each other since they were kids, running numbers under Frankie's shots. They put their arms around each other. They love each other. They are big buddies. It's wonderful to love another man. It's wonderful to walk away. Well, that's when you put the knife in, you know, when you get close to somebody. The act of betrayal earned Junior a new nickname in the underworld, the Snake. Nobody called him that to his face. For Junior, the nickname capped off the end of a tough summer, rough going after a rat in his crew on the Acres job squealed in federal court, landing him a guilty verdict on hijacking interstate commerce. Thrown into the federal detention center on West Street, Junior was released on $25,000 bond before his sentencing. According to an FBI informant, Profazzi Capos, Johnny Bath Beach, and Jiggs Forlano approached Junior and promised he'd be made a boss of Brooklyn if the Gallows disappeared. Junior was halfway there when Larry's heart stopped on the Sahara floor. A flash of light cut into the bar as the side door creaked open. "How are things?" "Everything is fine, Sergeant," said the bartender. "Everything is great." The NYPD sergeant heard a low moan on the floor. "Take him." "Not here. I don't want trouble here." The gang rushed out but didn't expect a patrolman in the parking lot, sitting in the Prowler in broad daylight. Sally D. pulled the snub-nosed revolver from behind his trousers, shot the patrolman in the face, hopped into the getaway car, and sped off onto Utica Avenue. Inside the Sahara, now brightly lit, red returned to Larry's blue face. He blinked his eyes open to a group of officers squatting over him. "The bastard," groaned Larry. "The dirty bastard. He gave me a C note. He gave me a C note." Gangland Tale: The Noose That Failed. New York Post, August 21, 1961. At the Snyder Avenue station, Inspector Raymond Martin of the 76th Precinct in South Brooklyn tried to get Larry to fess up on who strangled him and shot the patrolman lying in fair condition at Kings County Hospital. All Larry would say was, "Nobody would want to do a thing like that to me, Mr. Martin." Joey glowed next to his brother. "He's clammed up," he bragged to the gang. "He's not saying nothing." Picked up at his village pad, Joey was on high alert after Larry phoned from the Sahara and croaked, "You're next on the list." Joey couldn't stop staring at that deep purple welt dug around his brother's neck. "Gallo will carry the scar from the rope burn to his grave," said Deputy Inspector Alfred Panarella. The patrol car dragged Larry and Joey to the DA's office. Larry looked out of the window, lost in the distance. A burning cigarette dangled from Joey's lip. He stared right into the Daily News camera when the shutter snapped shut. "They are birds of a feather, denizens of the underworld," said the Kings County judge. "They won't talk. They're going to settle it their own way, under their own rules. You can expect other murders." The judge held Larry in $100,000 bond as a material witness in his own strangling, but cut Joey loose, reasoning, "I cannot commit him just because somebody says he will be the next to be attacked." Turning to Inspector Martin, the judge ordered, "The only way to break the back of the underworld is to shadow its members night and day. Drive them crazy." Outside the headquarters of the direct vending machine company, Joey laid down the stakes for the Gallo gang, 25 men strong, armed to the teeth, and ready to wage an all-out war against the Profazzi family. The Don had an underworld army of 200 men, superior in firepower but inferior in spirit. Outmanned, outnumbered, and clearly in over their heads, the Gallo gang would pull out all of the tricks to annihilate as many Profazzis as possible. The gang kissed their wives goodbye, packing them off to distant relatives, and grabbed mattresses. 51 President Street became the dormitory, a fortified compound to match the Alamo. The gang nailed chicken wire behind the windows to bounce off grenades. Digging in for the long haul, Umberto Gallo commandeered the mess on the second floor, stocking the shelves with soda and cans of tomato paste, stuffing the fridge with fresh mozzarella and strings of sausage from the local Salameria. The gang filed down the points of the 30-30s for the John Wayne Special, the Winchester 94. They loaded the magazines of the M1 carbine high-precision military rifles and lubed up the Mossberg and double-barrel J.C. Higgins shotguns. Gallo sentries stood silent on the 3-tiered, tarp-covered dormitory rooftop. Locals had been warned to keep off the streets. Some boarded shop, but most stayed, loyal to the boys and ready to alert them of danger. Outsiders didn't stand a chance in this tight-lipped neighborhood, silent as a Sicilian village. A full moon arose over President Street, setting the stage of the showdown in Red Hook, South Brooklyn's concrete-cracked Wild West. Junkyard dogs roamed the colorful cargo containers on the shipping yards. Derelicts lay passed out underneath the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. A car cruised silently past Jackie's Chocolate at 2:30 in the morning. A package flew out of the back window. Inside was the last outfit of Joe Jelly, wrapped around several dead fish. Lying at the bottom of Sheepshead Bay, Joe Jelly slept with the fishes. Urgent. 8/23/61, 10:25 a.m. To Director, FBI, from SAC, New York. Joseph Gregory Gallo, a.k.a. A.R. Info received 10 p.m. August 22 last. that Joseph Gallo had gathered a large group of men in vicinity of Van Brunt and Columbia Streets, Brooklyn, may have Thompson machine gun. Gallows had warned inhabitants of area to keep off the streets. On the FBI tip, Inspector Martin ordered his men, nicknamed Martin's Marauders, to barge in on a midnight raid. Shadows moved across the rooftops toward the dormitory. Raiders ran up the creaky, narrow steps to the second floor and flicked on the light, revealing Joey, Blast, Chico, and Lefty, sitting around a linoleum table. "What are you doing, sitting in the dark?" "We were talking," said Joey. "What's that, a new crime?" Bringing in floodlights, the raiders looked under furniture, behind the doors, and into the closet, where they found a box of .45s and Vinny the Sicilian. They'd expected 25 men armed with Tommy guns, but the Gallows wired up a makeshift network of intercoms and walkie-talkies, buying plenty of time to hide. According to an FBI agent, during police raids, the Gallows jumped out of the rear dormitory windows and shimmied down hanging ropes and ladders into adjacent buildings. Paths of entry and escape lay throughout the rubble-strewn back lots, from the third-floor apartment at 31 President to the entire building at 75 President. Hideouts and stash houses for the arsenal were up and down this single block of President Street. The only weapons found in the raid were 2 double-barreled shotguns lying on the rooftop, unconcealed and perfectly legal. The boys spent the night in the rat-infested Raymond Street jail, and at noon were brought up before Flatbush Court on consorting with criminals, each other. "We arrested them," said an officer, "because we didn't want to find bodies all over the streets. It was building up to open warfare like in the Roaring '20s. Free on bond, Joey strutted down the stone steps of Flatbush Court. The cuffs of his white button-down hung loose, half rolled up and unbuttoned. Mondo the Midget trailed behind. On Monday evening, August 21st, the Gallo gang spilled onto the sidewalk of Mama Rosa's Italian restaurant, sat on the curb and swigged wine from the bottle. Joey threw his brother an epic welcome home from the joint and survival bash. "What'll happen now?" asked a guy in the gang. "You don't think Joey and me are going to take this lying down, do you?" croaked Larry, a scarf tied neatly around his neck, covering his weak spot. Back at the dormitory, Larry roused snoozing Gallows, snoring open-mouthed in crumpled clothes, half sprawled and stinking hungover on 8 mattresses laid out on the 3rd floor. He ordered all clothes hung neatly on long wood racks, military barracks style, and all cigarettes extinguished in sand-filled cans. He took a record from his vast opera collection and cranked it. The clang of metal and the male chorus of Il Trovatore fired up the troops. The music rang on President Street. Unable to lock up the Gallows for good, but not wanting a massacre on his watch, Inspector Martin ordered the pizza squad to guard the 8-block radius around the dormitory with 24/7 surveillance on the Gallo gang. "Without our protection," said Martin, "their lives would not have been worth a counterfeit subway token." Inspector Martin called roll every morning to ensure Kid Blast, Peanuts, Punchy, Joey T., Vinny the Sicilian, Sammy the Syrian, Louie the Syrian, and Big and Little Lollipop had survived the night. Detective Bartles got friendly enough with the Gallows to join them at dinner, better than the usual stakeout grub. Umberto donned a chef's hat and boiled pasta in his 10-gallon pot for the big eaters, Tarzan especially, a Gallo with waste management interests. "He could eat 2 pounds of spaghetti," marveled Bartles. Detective Lambert watched Joey T., an art student turned racketeer, mix colors on his palette and paint a statue of Jesus bought at the monument shop down the street. Others passed the time building remote control model airplanes, practicing yo-yo tricks, and playing jacks on a stoop with neighborhood kids. Larry played Verdi on his violin. Scraping from the coffers, he gave each of his men $50 a week, enough to grease the wives' palms on Sunday, family day at the dormitory. Mothers brought in baked casseroles and hot plates, promising, "Don't worry, I've never squealed on your father, and I won't squeal on you." Inside the dormitory, Gallows were getting fat off Umberto's pasta, growing weaker by the day. All the while, Profazzis encircled the Red Hook backwaters like sharks in Cadillacs, hungry to break through the police cordon. "Let's get our guns and go after them," snapped Joey, but Larry wouldn't budge. Cooped up in the dormitory behind his chicken wire, he played arias on his violin while Joey choked on the bad air, needing to breathe free. "Let me die in my footsteps before I go down under the ground," sang Bob Dylan, who'd just begun playing on McDougal Street. Out in the village, the new crop refused to be beat. Protest music rang from the Café Bazaar, the Commons, the Figaro, and Café Hua. Protesting a ban on folk music in Washington Square Park, young rebels in tweed sang "We Shall Not Be Moved" as cops tossed them over the basin rim of the fountain. Eluding Pizza Squad tails and Profazzi hitmen, Jeffy picked up Joey and brought him home to their new ground-floor apartment on 8th Street with a garden in the rear. His mother's lamp hung from the ceiling, shaded in blue and yellow glass, decorated by silver filigree. Joey gave Jeffy $100 to fix the place up with antiques from the village auction houses. "He loved all the little things I got," said Jeffy. "It just seemed that everything that one of us did turned the other one on." A loaded rifle stood at Joey's bedside. Lepke, the terrier, lay at his feet. Joey and Jeffy were happy. "We never discussed the future," said Jeffy. "We had no future." "In the past couple of weeks," said a police official of Joey, "knowing he's a marked man, he's been swaggering along Broadway with a couple of his hoods hitting the spots. He's unarmed and he doesn't seem to have a worry in the world. In fact, he's told us, 'My life is one foot in the coffin, the other on a banana peel. But I don't worry.' Nothing mattered when the dirt got packed. "What will they see in a book?" asked Joey. "Paper and bullshit." Camus got a shelf at 8th Street Bookshop. Garibaldi, the Italian revolutionary, got a statue in Washington Square Park, covered in pigeon shit. The People versus Crazy Joe. Joey sent a communique to the Profazzi family. Deliver Junior Persico to President Street, dead or alive. Nobody responded. True to his new nickname on President Street, the Snake was slippery. Word on the street was that he never stayed in one place for more than 3 nights, making him hard to pin down for an ambush by the Gallos. "That bum wouldn't stand still for Pope Paul," swore an NYPD intelligence official. "Only a crazy man could think he could shake the Snake." Urgent. 9/20/61, 9:14 p.m. JFA. To Director, FBI, from SAC, New York. Joseph Gregory Gallo, a.k.a. A.R., Daily Teletype Summary. Carmine Persico, Jr. is to be sentenced on September 29 next, and informant stated subject anticipates having some men in courtroom to determine if Persico shows up. If sentencing is postponed, the Gallo men will follow Persico from courtroom in an attempt to kill him at first opportunity. On September 29th, the judge at Brooklyn Federal Court threw the book at Junior on the Akers job, sentencing him to 15 years for hijacking interstate commerce. The slick defense lawyers delayed sentencing. The pockets of the Profazzi family were deep enough to throw money at appeals or set up Swiss bank accounts for witnesses for the prosecution. A month was plenty of time for Junior to go out and beat the rap. Sitting by Junior was his co-defendant, Joe Magnasco, a.k.a. Joe Mag, the guy who worked the phones on the Akers job. Junior was the best man at Joe Mag's wedding and the godfather of his child. Joe Mag was the proud owner of 100 Gallo peanut vending machines. He spit on Junior outside in the corridor. "You're a dead man," said Junior. A cordon of NYPD detectives surrounded Junior and walked him outside the courthouse. There waited Gallo troops, Punchy, Chico, and Nick Bianco. "You think," said Nick Bianco. "Dirty rat bastard," said Punchy. "You're going to get your heart cut out," said Chico. They spit at Junior. Junior spit back. The cops carted him off to the Snyder Avenue station and questioned him for several hours on Larry's strangling. "You leave us alone for 24 hours, Junior later blurted out in custody, "We'd have the gallows cleaned out." The NYPD dragged Junior over to President Street and asked Larry if this was the guy who tried to kill him. Larry looked to the ground in silence. The Mafia called it omerta, the vow of silence. But in the old country, omerta didn't mean silence. It meant manliness, that a man in trouble settles matters his way, not the way of the cops. On the second floor of the dormitory, Joey T., the racketeer artist, painted a prophecy in huge, scrawling letters across the dining room wall. "Don't talk. The life you save may be your own." Urgent. 10/3/61, 7:08 p.m. To the Director, FBI, from SAC, New York. Joseph Gregory Gallo, a.k.a. A.R., Daily Teletype Summary. Informant advised Carmine Persico, Jr. controls a Brooklyn bar named Chateau Rousseau. On evening of October 1 last, subject went to Chateau Rousseau with several associates and made statement that the bar was now under his control. Subject immediately replaced bartender with one of his associates. Informant also advised subject stated to him during past week that he was going to do a lot of damage in the near future. Joey planned to put the snatch on Ruby Stein, the biggest loan shark in New York City, knowing he would demand a hefty ransom. Living in a plush Park Avenue apartment, Ruby spent nights on East 53rd Street at El Baracco, its signature drink, the Nicky Finn. "If you have enjoyed the dinner, the service, and the atmosphere of El Baracco," read the yellow card on the table, "please do not tell your friends, as our seating capacity is limited. The management." As Ruby stepped out one October evening in 1961, Gallo hoods Big Mike and Lefty grabbed him and tried to drag him into the parked car. Ruby hung onto the canopy pole and screamed. Big Mike and Lefty sped off empty-handed just before the cops showed. On October 4th, Joey sat in the Longshore restroom, edgy and waiting for Profazzi Big Shot, Harry Fontana, the capo of Red Hook. That morning, Joey told Fontana to show up for a sit-down on Gallo turf. Joey was ready to tell him who was boss. When Fontana didn't show, Joey pumped up Junior's old sidekick Joe Mag to go out to the college restaurant, the capo's Brooklyn hangout, and kidnap him by sundown. Larry said to stay put, but Joe Mag sped off in a brown Buick. As the sun set on Joe Mag, his cousin, Mrs. Tony Schatz, made her way up the steps of the BMT 4th Avenue subway stop against the rush of evening commuters with day jobs. Like the other wives of those on President Street, she'd been wondering when her husband was coming home. Tony seemed worse for the wear on Family Day, especially after Inspector Martin killed the visits of his 15-year-old son. "The boy looked at his father as if he were a combination of Paul Revere and Robin Hood," said Martin. Tony figured that if his son spent some time hanging around, watching the sweaty lunks sit around and play pinochle all day, he'd get disillusioned with the life altogether. Martin knew better. If the visits didn't stop, Martin threatened to charge Tony with impairing the morals of a minor. Mrs. Schatz now saw a crowd hovering on the sidewalk in front of the college restaurant. Standing in a frock, Father Benny Calleja of Our Lady of Peace opened up his little black book and administered last rites. The police drew a chalk line around Joe Mag, lying face down on the pavement. A blood stain covered his left cheek. "My God!" shouted Mrs. Schatz. "That's my cousin Joe!" Gunned down in the course of trying to kidnap the capo, Joe Mag was the first casualty from the President Street encampment. Shot down, just like his father, some men remarked. The wives crossed themselves and could only think, "Could have been my husband." Family Day took a turn for the worse. "Do you think we can live on $35 a week?" screamed the wives. "The children miss you. What kind of a home have we got with no father? You can get a job, you bum. You don't have to be a big shot. I want you home, do you hear me? I want you home." Another Gallo gang member, Nick Bianco, had his own beef with the men. A Rhode Island bachelor, Bianco rolled up to President Street with a dapper wardrobe hung up in the back seat of his car. "Them slobs in there never had but $3 shirts," he complained. "I come in with good shirts, and all of a sudden they're all wearing shirts and changing 3 times a day. 3 times! I never heard of top businessmen changing more than twice a day." His wardrobe dwindled to practically nil. Bianco dressed in his jammies and tucked himself into one of the row of 8 mattresses on the 2nd floor. The gang's German shepherd woke him the next morning, barking at the door before the NYPD broke it down with the battering ram. Lieutenant Kelly suppressed a smile to find his old Marine buddy, the hulking Tony Schatz, sitting in his underwear and shades. Half awake at the breakfast table, hardly looking up from his coffee, Larry wished the raiders a good morning. Ignored by several shaving gallows, the raiders seized 3 kitchen knives, a bread knife, a hammer, and the Mossberg target rifle. Larry suggested they look under the unmade bed for the 12-gauge shotgun. 13 gallows rolled into the paddy wagon, taken in on the same old consorting charge. "If we don't keep picking these hoods up and tossing them into Raymond Street jail every couple of days, if we don't keep 'em off balance," said a high police official, "blood is going to run through the streets of this town." "Inspector Martin, you will never know what you stopped," joked Larry, putting his hands to his purple-ringed throat. "We were up to here. We were going to bust out in Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, every place. Get the whole thing over." The judge arraigned the Gallos as material witnesses for a Kings County special grand jury investigation, called to get to the root of Larry's strangling and the murder of Joe Magg. "It is quite obvious to the court that this is an incipient gang war," said the judge. He fixed the bail at $25,000 for each broke Gallo. Picked up hours earlier while eating at a village restaurant, Joey yelled to a detective nodding off in the courtroom. "How many days you been working, huh? Everybody on the homicide squad is going to wind up getting divorced. You watch." Walter Buckbinder joined the proceedings as chief investigator of the DA's racket squad, the boys responsible for Joey's extortion setup. Folding up his subpoena, Joey poked it at Walter's chest and said, "Someday I'm going to give you one of these things. I've had about 100 from you, and you haven't solved a crime yet." Poaching a blank one from the DA's office, Joey filled it out and handed it to him the next morning as he strutted into Brooklyn Supreme Court for his grand jury appearance. "Here, Walter, try this on for size." The reporters howled at the mockery of justice. Joey played up the farce for what it was. Hiding their faces from the herd of cameramen lurking in the corridor, Mrs. Schatz and Punchy's wife were shuttled into the jury room, having been called to testify on the source of their husband's income. "These girls will have to go on home relief if their husbands aren't let alone to go back to work," Joey told the press. Ever-present Gabe Pressman put up the NBC TV mic and asked about the gang war. "Jesus, they're not murder guns," said Joey, taken aback. "They're hunting guns. We use the guns for hunting deer." Standing behind was David Price, Esquire, representing the Gallos on behalf of their Uncle Joe, Price's partner in the firm. For the past 5 months, Price had been trying to pin down Joey to work on his defense, but Joey wouldn't give him the time of day, telling him, "That's legal business. Attend to it. Go away. Don't bother me." Now Price had to worry about 13 Gallo gang members in civil prison. Old and cranky, the last thing he needed was Joey's mouth mucking up the works. He grabbed Joey by the back of the neck. "God damn it, you shut up!" "Wait a minute, counselor," snapped Joey. "This is my life. Let me say what I want to say. I want the reporters to get the right story. The police are harassing us." Joey turned to the chief investigator, lurking in the hallway to check out the act. "Gang war? Dum-dum bullets? You made up a big story about gang war. There's no gang. There's no gang war. There's nothing. You guys are making something out of nothing, and I want to tell the truth." The 6 o'clock news broadcast the truth, according to Crazy Joe. He riffed on the mic with the snap of a hustler, ad-libbing free-form attacks on the hypocrisies of the age. He took on the DA's political motives. "It's an election year, right? Everybody wants to get in on the act." He spoke about J. Edgar Hoover's obsession with the Reds. There is as much gang warfare in Brooklyn as there is a dangerous communist party in this country. He took on the terror of the downward spiraling nuclear situation as the world rallied to keep the Soviet premier from test bombing 50 megatons, the largest nuclear bomb to date. The only guy I'm afraid of is Khrushchev, this fallout business. I think he's nuts. Price steeled for a coronary with all of the pre-trial publicity drummed up by his client in the weeks before the Teddy Moss extortion trial. A brutal winter on the way, Price decided to hell with it. He flew south to North Miami Beach to nap on the chaise lounge behind his Pepto-Bismol pink bungalow, listen to the Giants game on the radio, and drive his blue Pontiac to the early bird special. "Have you got a lawyer?" asked the judge in Manhattan General Sessions Court, Part 8. "No," said Joey. Going into his chambers, the judge gave Joey a break by calling Irving Mendelsohn, a top defense lawyer who had made a name for himself by taking on the strange case of the belligerent writer Norman Mailer. Mailer prophesied that the hip would rise in a violent, bloody revolution against the squares. Looking for evidence, he fired up after Fidel Castro, who had waged hit-and-run guerrilla warfare against the crooked dictator Batista from the wilds of the Sierra Maestra, finally stormed the palace gates. At his October 1960 visit to the UN, Castro partied at the 9th floor of the Hotel Teresa, the Waldorf Astoria of Harlem, on a $1,700 room service tab of steaks, rum, cigars. A red, white, and blue Cuban flag unfurled outside his suite. Hundreds gathered outside the barricades on 125th Street. One held a placard with a picture of Castro's bearded face, reading, "Man, like us cats dig Fidel the most. He knows what's hip and bugs the squares." Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev showed up and kissed Castro on the cheek, turning the hip scene into Squaresville. Mailer, in a fevered state, wrote a letter to Castro that was later printed in the Village Voice. "You belong not to the United States nor to the Russians, but to we of the Third Force. So long as you exist and belong neither to America nor to Russia, you give a bit of life to the best and most passionate men and women all over the earth. You are the answer to the argument of commissars and statesmen that revolutions cannot last, that they turn corrupt or total and eat their own. You are the one who can show the world that a revolutionary belongs to no one." He signed it, "Still your brother." Hopped up on years of Reich, jazz, and a steady intake of pot, Mailer had reached super-sane clarity on the brink of self-inflicted madness. Shortly after writing his letter, he stabbed his wife in the gut and the back with a penknife in order to relieve her of cancer. After 17 days in Bellevue, Mailer was judged sane. His lawyer, Mendelsohn, hashed out a deal with the DA and got the famous writer off on $2,500 bail. An expert at working the system, Mendelsohn saw right through the cracks in Joey's case. The star witness for the prosecution was suckered by the NYPD racket squad posing as mobsters. The linchpin evidence was 3 undercover detectives at the Luna who listened to a translation of a vague threat against Teddy Moss, spoken in Italian with no surveillance tapes to back it up. Mendelsohn strode into court on Monday morning, ready to clean house. Joey pulled him aside and laid down the score. "That goddamn Dago judge is never going to give me a fair shake." "It wasn't true," said Mendelsohn. "He could vouch for the judge. Fair, honest, a lifelong friend." "You just told me all I want to know," said Joey. Joey refused to cooperate with his newly appointed counsel. A figure of authority ordained by the New York bar, praised by the New York Times as an outstanding criminal lawyer, Mendelsohn felt he deserved better than to get tossed around the court like a trapeze artist. "I am the lawyer, and I take orders from no one," he told the court. "I am ready to try the case." Picking the first juror from the pool, he officially kicked off The People versus Joseph Gallo. Joey cornered him outside the courthouse elevators. "Mendelsohn, that's a musical name, and I'm hip to the tune you're playing. It is my swan song. How can you choose jurors for me when you don't even know what my position is?" Mendelsohn put up a finger as the doors closed, trapping the lawyer with the reporters. "He won't talk to me," said Mendelsohn. "The judge demands that I represent him. What can I do?" Taking a page from Mailer's defense, Mendelsohn cooked up a scheme with Weisswasser, a junior lawyer in the firm of Price and Iovine. If Joey would agree to be committed for mental examination, the trial could be postponed for enough time for Price to return from Miami and work on a proper defense. Hearing of the plan in the depths of Sessions Court, Joey told Weisswasser he'd throw that bastard Mendelsohn out the window, and you're going right behind him. "He gave me better marks than my own shrink does," bragged Joey. "Does that sound crazy to you?" Gene Grove scribbled furiously at the Waverly Lounge, the bar of the run-down Earl Hotel, thrilled to get the scoop on the meaning behind Joey's nickname. Al, the owner, had seen a lot of characters come and go through the Earl. Ramblin' Jack Elliott in room 312, Bob Dylan in 305, and now Crazy Joe, just another outlaw drifting into the bar, spilling his guts to the New York Post. "I'll bet the papers are out now," said Joey. The piano player headed out to the newsstand to pick up copies of the dailies that looked to Joey for tabloid fodder, from the Daily Mirror to the Journal American. There was Joey in the early morning edition of the Daily News, candy for the strap-hangers. Joey took Gene over to the corner bistro on Jane and West 4th Streets. Norman manned the tiny kitchen, simmering the chili, molding handfuls of ground beef out of 10-pound bags, slapping them onto wax patty papers. Bistro burgers mixed with the smell of whiskey and old wood at this tin-ceiling enclave for bohemians. Gene sensed how distant Joey's life in Red Hook seemed from life here, talking literature and holding court with bohemians at the bistro. "Joey loved the village as only those who move here from some other where can," wrote Gene. He spoke of his Brooklyn home as someone might speak of Ashtabula. On the night before the trial, Joey took Jeffy out to dinner in a French restaurant with their old friends, Al the actor and Joyce the torch singer. "Listen, Joey, why do you have to go through with this? They're going to get you, don't you know that? Why don't you just leave, tonight, you and Jeffy?" "No, Joyce, I can't do that." "But why not? Why can't you go to Florida or Mexico, anywhere? Just get away from it. What if it goes the wrong way?" "Listen, I've no choice. I can't run away. This is what I've got to do." "But, Joey, what have you got to do that's more important than staying alive and staying together, you two? You've got something now. What difference does it make where you are? You've got enough money for a ticket. Go, do something else." "Too late. It's done. I've got to go through with it." "Why? What's more important than your freedom?" "I stand on the Constitution of the United States of America." "Have you any particular section of the Constitution on which you are standing?" "I stand on the Constitution." "On the whole document?" "Your Honor, I refuse to participate in any of these proceedings." "Do you refuse to answer my question?" "I have to remain mute, Your Honor." "The defense may inquire if it wishes," stated the assistant DA, standing with his shoulders hunched and his palms out. Joey wouldn't let his lawyer speak. Mendelsohn walked out of the courtroom. The judge ordered Joey to be remanded to the Tombs for the remainder of his trial. Weisswasser rose to object. "Don't bother," said Joey. "He's too prejudiced." Joey hadn't bothered to call any witnesses in his defense. He didn't say anything throughout the trial except that he refused to participate in the proceedings and would remain mute. He'd stuck it to the judge just like he stuck it to Bobby Kennedy, refusing to play his part in the dog and pony show, a sham devoid of meaning. Stuck in the can on the last night of his trial, Joey dug the true meaning of his nickname. Sure, he'd been restless after that car wreck in his teens. He'd just cheated death. Why should he waste his life as a slave to the wrench or a stooge to Uncle Sam? He was no crazier than Larry, who had trembled to the point of blackout at Fort McClellan. Doctors at the United States Army Hospital listed Larry's precipitating stress as separation from the family and the mother's illness, enough to make the barracks think he was sissy. They got shipped to a god-forsaken South Pacific island for occupation duty. Larry got discharged with a World War II Victory Medal and a $35 a month pension for life, payback for sacrificing his nerves for his country. Bobby Kennedy was the crazy one, obsessed with Hoffa's perfume, reacting badly with the bootlegger blood in his veins. Bobby wanted Joey in the nut factory for life. Public Enemy 1 was just too good-looking, too smart, and too dangerous for seeing the corrupt game. Joey saw only the truth, to be forged in hot lead at the edge of nowhere. The Hash. Before he was Sid Slater, frontman for Crazy Joe, he was Sidney Slepp, an Iwo Jima veteran with a wife and kid and an honest job working in a jukebox rental outfit. After Joey took over the operation, Sid stayed on at $100 a week and moved up to managing Joey's night spots, including the Playboy on the East Side. "No one is getting hurt by what I'm doing," Sid told his wife. "Except you, Sidney," she said. She took off with his daughter. Balding, with a middle-aged pouch, Sid didn't have a problem finding action with the B-girls hanging around the Playboy. His close proximity to the underworld gave him an allure of danger. Then came the night when Joey called him over and said, "From now on, Sidney, you can just call the five of us the Barbershop Quintet." Sid went back to his hotel room and gave himself a good look in the mirror. He thought about his brothers for the first time in forever. 4 years later, Sid found himself in a second-floor umbrella shop trying to con Teddy Moss into buying a truckload of hijacked liquor. Sid didn't get Joey's hang-up on this guy. Teddy was a B-grade nobody, but Joey couldn't let him slide. It was like he wanted to remake everybody in his image. First Sid, next Teddy, then the world. Driving over to the Piers restaurant on the night of Teddy's shakedown at the Luna, Sid got stopped halfway across the Manhattan Bridge. The cops came at him with guns and hauled him downtown, taking him through the side entrance of the Criminal Courts building on Leonard Street into the DA's office. Lieutenant Vitrano gave it to him straight. He didn't talk like a gangster, as he had with Teddy Moss. He talked like a hard-nosed cop. "You've got 3 fine brothers and 2 nice sisters who won't have anything to do with you," said Vitrano. "You've lost a good wife and a lovely daughter. And what are you getting out of this life with Joey Gallo and his punks? Nothing." "You know how it is," said Sid. "Tell me," said Vitrano. "Once you get in, you can never get out. You keep thinking that someday you'll make a big score. Then you can take a quick powder, go somewhere, and start all over again." "No one ever made a big score working for Gallo," said Vitrano. "You think it over." They gave Sidney a number when he entered the Tombs, a concrete jungle with the lingering smell of urine. Nobody wanted to hear his sob story. He turned his pockets inside out and handed in his $150 suit. Sid felt soft and queasy standing naked for the prison hose down with the hustlers and the junkies. He tried to wash the black smudges off his fingertips. He stepped into his prison uniform, a gray job that hung on me like a burlap bag. There was no AC in his cell. It was hot, sweltering. The bunk had 1 blanket, springs, but no mattress. The smell. He turned to the enormous black man locked inside with him. "What in God's name is that? You hungry, man? I've been saving that fish sandwich for more than a week." Candy heard the special knock at 2 in the morning on her door at the Mayflower Hotel, towering over the south end of Central Park West. The knocks never stopped, even when she was singing or on the toilet. She told her friend to hurry up and lock the door. She didn't feel like going out to watch Sid and Joey take over nightclubs, eating and drinking for free until the cops reported the presence of underworld characters to the state liquor authority. "Joey and Sid go sit in a club for 2 weeks and it's closed," said Candy. "Now, when they're going out in the evening, they both state, 'What place can we close next?'" Candy wanted to sit in her room and talk about everything. Metaphysics, psychiatry, Joey. If she got the kind of publicity Joey got, she'd be a star in the theater. Sid didn't get any press. Not like Joey. Joey was boss in Brooklyn before he was 22, Candy told her friend. Joey was like a real-life character out of The Untouchables. Candy loved that show. At El Barraco, she saw Joey put down a 50 for a tip after a diners club scam where he avoided the bill. She knew when she met him at the Bowl-O-Rama on West 58th Street that he was marvelous, full of ambition, with a fantastic mind. The opposition is made up of a little group that's powerful, wealthy, established Italians, Candy explained. Joey is bigger than they are. Anyway, these people have lost their power, supposedly a lot of it. It's been given over to Joey. And money has been given over. Oh, God, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands. At one point, Joey was feeding and taking care of 72 families. Do you know what that is? To pay for 72 families? Rent and food and this and that and clothes? Candy's friend wasn't getting how big Joey was. Candy opened up her bedside copy of RFK's The Enemy Within at the well-worn crease in the spine. She read aloud her favorite part about how Joey's mother couldn't understand how her sons had so much money when they did no work. Candy hoped Sid got some of that cash. She didn't want to badger her good old auntie anymore. She already owed the hotel $200. She had to pay for vocal lessons taught by an opera singer who thought she had a very nice voice. Not to mention dance lessons, new clothes, and a new apartment. I have done a lot for them, Candy told her friend. While they were in the can, I was their contact outside, and I ran a lot of errands for them. Candy looked after Sid like a baby. If he tried to ditch her, she had enough on him to cause trouble. She could always squeal to the cops. If Joey knew about the way Sid treated her, he would not let him get away with it. She told her friend that not many people knew she and Joey had gotten in a fight, but everything would be all right. Joey wouldn't hurt her. She knew too much. If Sid didn't come through, she'd go straight to Joey. Her friend finally left, leaving Candy to sit around and think. The weeks living in this hotel room seemed to all blend together. She decided to go out to the African Room on 3rd Avenue and East 48th Street, a dark cavern decorated with green shoots of bamboo and a giant papier-mâché gorilla. She had a very funny night, a very witty night, and the benny she took activated just in time, catching her up with the speed of the dancers and Chief Bey, the conga drummer from Dakar. Before she knew it, she was stuck back in the room with Sid. "You're lying to me somewhere on something," said Candy. "I sense it as strong as I'm sitting here right now. You're either not telling me something or you're lying about something, and I don't know what it is, but I would swear on my life right now." "Where?" "I sense it so strongly that I would stake on it. I've never been wrong with this feeling." "Well, what's the—" "I don't know. I'm not saying it's bad or good or anything, but I know something is out of place." "Where?" "I don't know. Where? I just dropped a piece of hash on the floor. Do you see it? A little piece. Do you see it? Isn't it annoying, as blind as I am, these things?" "Girl with too much. Who sent you the pretty flowers?" "Does that annoy you so much that I worry about flowers every day? I must keep fresh flowers in the house every day." Sid tried to compensate for her secret admirer by passing her off some swag, a stash of panties, baby dolls, nightgowns, and cotton dresses, which he had gotten for practically nothing. "So cheap, you gotta like it," said Sid. "What if I don't like the stuff? Then it isn't cheap at all, right?" Candy could do better from the fat guy in Times Square who sold Bergdorf Goodman stuff to the drag queens for $10. Sid didn't get Candy's fabulous reputation for dressing. "I'm a perfect 10, explained Candy. "I've always said this. I can't wear a 9. I don't wear full skirts. That's one thing. I only wear a sheath dress. Certain colors I refuse to wear. I'm very fussy about my clothes." Honest to God, she could die. Sid felt like a real jerk. Candy consoled him. "Don't be sorry, dear, because you didn't do wrong. In fact, I think it's very sweet of you. Frankly, I'd rather have the money and go shopping with it myself. I think I'd do better picking things out myself, don't you? Do what you want. That's right. Don't resent that. Candy could see she hurt Sid. She tried to be helpful. She was on her way to go meet a photographer from the Daily News. If Sid wanted her to, she'd ask about those rumors she heard about Joey. I heard a couple of little rumors last night, she said. I heard something that concerned Tony Bender, that Joey's been stepping out of hand and Joey's been pushing an awful lot of people. The word is out. That is the hash, the sum total left. Sid said that if he wanted to find out what was going on with Joey, all he had to do was drive over to Joey's and ask him. Sid still had eyes for Candy, petite and blonde. A soft doll who only weighed about 80 pounds with a copy of Variety in her lap, he said. But Candy seemed to think that he was making $1 million a week. Sid wasn't making enough to buy her a half pint of perfume. Sid was barely scraping by after getting wrapped up in the Teddy Moss ordeal, slapped with $10,000 bail on attempted extortion. Worried sick about getting locked up for 14 years in the can, Sid snapped when Joey confronted him about the hash situation. "Have you ever mentioned to anyone that you got hash from Baba?" asked Sid. "No," said Candy. "You did mention it, because there's a fellow who came back to a friend of Joey's who heard from a boy that Baba has the best hash in the city. And would this guy get to Joey to get to Baba to get some hash for him? Now all hell has been raised, including my life. I'm in all kinds of trouble over this, and the story is all through the village. My life is in jeopardy, and yours isn't particularly healthy either. Your name was mentioned." Candy needed to light up. "No, don't smoke now, please. There's no hash, no nothing around here. You know how many ears this has gone to? My life is in jeopardy." Sid paced the room. "Do you know I can get killed for this? Now listen, I've never given you a piece of hash, understand?" "Yes." "And there's nothing between us but friendship." "Yes." "You never got a piece of hash from this house. I never left it around. You smoked here, you brought some up, but I have never given you any." "Yes." "You have never even kissed me, have you?" "I'm scared," said Candy. "I don't want to be marked for the rest of my life. Joey is page 1. Candy tried to get Joey on the phone, but couldn't reach him. "This is serious," said Sid. "You can't imagine how big this could be. It could be a firecracker that would blow up in your face." "But Sid, baby, I've gone out with these people far more than you know. I love them so much. Sid, I love these people. Do you know what love is? How could Joey Gallo?" Candy started to cry. She couldn't believe Joey had threatened to cut her face off for saying he had access to unlimited hash. She'd never act again. No more art movies in Massachusetts or anywhere else. Sid consoled her. He promised to take her to the Palladium and spend the $100, burning a hole in his pocket. Candy wanted to know how Sid got all that cash. Sid never used to have to deal with these kinds of girls. He was nervous and jittery. He'd lost 30 pounds. Strolling through the village streets, he heard footsteps and became paranoid. He wheeled around and almost pulled out his gun on a poor girl chasing after her loose Dalmatian. The hash situation hadn't helped his nerves. Worse, Joey was hell-bent on a Profazzi killing spree. Larry tried to hold him back, still believing the conflict could be solved without violence, but Joey wasn't listening. Over the weeks, smuggled in grocery sacks and snuck through the rubble-strewn back lots and over the rooftops of President Street, an arsenal was compiled under the noses of the NYPD. Broken-down rifles ready to be reassembled, scopes, silencers, smoke grenades, M80s, bombs. Joey planned to strike on the upcoming weekend, November 18, in an all-out attack against the Profazzis, ending it once and for all in a veritable suicide mission. "Brooklyn was in for a bloodbath," confessed Sid. "I was in a mood to get out if there was any possible way to do it." It was time to turn in his pinstripes. He ratted out the plan to Lieutenant Vitrano and Inspector Martin. He told them that the heavy artillery was stashed in Lefty Big Ear's room on the second floor of the dormitory. Lefty awoke to 30 NYPD raiders. Caught in the basement of the Longshore restroom with a canvas sack of 4 revolvers, Umberto was arrested on firearms possession. 11 in the Gallo gang were hauled in on consorting. The cops missed the big arsenal, but stopped the bloodbath. Kid Blast laughed it off, smirking for the Daily News cameras in his big sedan. Punchy grinned from the back seat and pointed at flat-topped Butch, smiling wide with his 4 front teeth missing, knocked out by Joey on one of his bad days. They screeched away from Brooklyn Magistrates' Court. Raids nip Gallo gang war, say cops. New York Post, November 22, 1961. Across the bridge in General Sessions Court, Teddy Moss took the witness stand. He explained to the jury how he was an honest businessman preyed upon by Joey, who had tried to take over his thriving check-cashing business. "Tell us what happened then," asked Assistant D.A. Kelly. "I got to the Luna restaurant about 7, said Teddy. "Joe Gallo comes back to the table and asks Mike what was going to be with this kid. Do we have to put him in the hospital and give him some time to think, or is he going to be smart and we can be friends and partners and play ball? Now, as a result of your contacts and conversations with all of these defendants, were you in fear?" "Yes, I was." "Were you in fear of physical harm?" "Yes, I was." Joey doodled on a scratch pad and stared at the ceiling. Jeffy watched him from the stands. Ignoring Teddy, Joey turned around and smiled. Jeffy didn't have a thing to worry about. Closing out the witnesses for the Empire State of New York, Assistant D.A. Clark brought in the NYPD detective who sat behind Joey's table at the Luna on the evening of the shakedown. "I can't hear him, Mr. Clark," Joey interrupted. "What is that?" "I can't hear him. Tell him to speak louder." "Will you speak louder, detective?" "Yes, sir." Joey twitched as the detective took the jury through the events of his undercover duty on May 11, from 7:15 p.m., the moment he saw Joey enter the Luna, to Teddy's shrimp cocktail. They were conversing. Mr. Gallo was overheard to say that... Mr. Clark, do you want the language exactly? Yes. Mr. Gallo was overheard to say, "Listen, you fuck. Don't talk like a girl. I want straight answers." Gallo was then heard to say, "Now listen, you gotta come in with us on this deal because I'll put you in the hospital for a couple of months, and you'll have something to think about when you are stretched out in the hospital." The jury sat and watched the judge and the good-looking assistant DA and the unimpeachable detective, believing every word, leaving Joey on the outs as a menace to society, a stranger with a big mole, slicked-back hair, and a gangster suit. Staring down the detective as he left the stand and walked past the defense table, Joey shouted, "Motherfucking son of a bitch!" He jumped up to attack before an officer of the court stepped in. The jury cleared out. Cops surrounded Joey. Looking back at Assistant D.A. Kelly, the state's righteous golden boy, Joey shouted, "You're a dirty rat! You're framing me!" But by then it was all too late. It only took the jury 3 hours to deliberate. The people won. "This defendant has sought to impose the law of the jungle on his victims," said the assistant DA at the sentencing. The state detailed Joey's sorry string of antisocial behavior. 19 arrests since the age of 18, from vagrancy to attempted sodomy to numerous violations of traffic regulations, not to mention defiance of the McClellan Committee when called to answer for improper activities in the labor field. This defendant has firmly made up his mind to pursue a career of violence and crime. His continued predatory role poses a serious menace to decent law-abiding people. He is a determined enemy of society who has evidenced a complete and utter disregard, even a contempt for duly constituted authority. He has shown no remorse and has given no indication that he would adjust his conduct to the standards of civilized society. For these reasons, then, Your Honor, the people respectfully recommend that no consideration be shown to the defendant on this sentence." Looking down upon Joey, conservatively dressed in a gray suit and blue tie, the judge imposed the maximum, 7 to 14 years on conspiracy and attempted extortion. A very pregnant Jeffy looked about ready to burst into tears. Joey put his arm around her and said, don't worry, it'll be all right." The guards put on the shackles. The potato fields rolled by until the rusted spire of Attica appeared on the hill in the middle of nowhere. Guards brought Joey to the gallery in Block B, tossed him in cell number 4, and slammed the doors shut. Hype. At his wits' end about how to wipe out the Gallos, protected 24/7 by the best security force in the city, Junior, according to legend, slid a dress on his wild, curly-haired sidekick and sent him off in a red sports car with a trunkload of weapons. The plan was to slip past the pizza squad with a wink and a smile, then blast the dormitory, but somebody tipped off Inspector Martin. He doubled the manpower around President Street, leaving the gunmen all dressed up with nowhere to go. Soon, a fleet of what Inspector Martin called shotgun riders roamed through the neighborhood, perfectly legal as the weapons weren't concealed. Cruising along Court Street in a white Oldsmobile, a rider found a sitting duck on the afternoon of December 11th, 1961, Gallo man Big Lollipop, coming out of Pinchic's with a can of paint in each hand for the dormitory. Bullets sprayed from the back seat, hitting Lollipop in the ankle. Paint poured out from a pierced can. Old man Profazzi was not happy. The botched Lollipop hit was the latest headline in the Gallo-Profazzi war, a spectacle of vanishing bodies, fish wrapped in clothes, cross-dressing kamikaze raids, and now drive-bys on paint stores in broad daylight, in the middle of one of the most crowded thoroughfares of the borough. According to a Profazzi family informant, there were to be no more attempts on the Gallos unless there were no witnesses, near impossible considering the NYPD encampment on President Street. Cops made the job tougher upon arresting a shotgun rider on account of the state conservation law, claiming that the loaded weapons endangered the exotic birds and frogs in the Prospect Park Zoo. Up to his ears in Gallows, Junior exhausted his best tricks by 2:30 in the morning on January 5, 1962, as Sammy Davis Jr. wound down his second act at the Copa, heavy with the smell of Chinese food. Junior's beefy dinner companion, Profazzi capo Jiggs Forlano, got up from their table at ringside. He walked across the dance floor toward a petite blonde with dark cat's-eye shades, a fur hat, and a matching coat, laughing hysterically next to her date, that pudgy, stray Gallo, Sid Slater. "What the hell are you doing in a fancy nightclub like this?" asked Jiggs. Unaware that Sid was ratting to the DA, Larry had given Sid a bill roll to pay for Jeffy's hospital bill. Sid kept half, $300, enough to get a few scotches on the rocks and some champagne. His moll deserved a good night out, having been busy dog-sitting Lepke while Jeffy was in labor. "Come over to my table," said Jiggs. Sid headed to ringside. Junior's blood boiled. He wasn't sealed behind an iron fence. He was a tough son of a bitch with real balls. According to varying reports, Sid was grabbed by the tie and given a cheek wound, either by a bite or a newspaper hook, the kind newspaper vendors use on a ring to open up tabloids. Captains and waiters in two-toned tuxedo jackets cleared out the area and told the customers to stay away. Blood poured from Sid's nasty wound. He put a handkerchief to his eye and got carted off to the station for questioning. Paparazzi snapped shots of his date, showing off her profile, mugging for the cameras in her big moment. That hit show at the Copa. New York Post, January 18, 1962. 3 in the Gallo gang stood on a barren street corner in black fedoras, hands stuffed into the pockets of their overcoats. A cigarette jutted straight from a lip. Nobody looked at the camera. Click. Inside the Longshore restroom, a pack of Gallos stood around Kid Blast, who was barking out orders at the table. Big Lollipop leaned on crutches with an ankle cast on his left leg. Weisswasser, the lawyer, put his hand inside his suit coat, looking like he'd pull out a gat instead of another bill. Click. Larry stared into the lens in a black pork pie hat. The gang looked their best for the Life magazine photographers, posing like real tough guys. The cameras cleared. Umberto reheated the stale cooking oil and warmed one of the remaining cans of tomatoes on the shelf. Gallo slouched in the freshly painted dormitory and littered the floor with cigarette butts. Unable to pay Con Ed, they froze in unmade beds with unchanged sheets. Larry brooded as the boys shot stick in purgatory. Days ran into each other until the afternoon of January 31, 1962. Smoke poured from the third-story window above Mrs. Gatto's luncheonette down the block. "Come on!" shouted Larry. Larry rushed up the stairs. Shrieks of children pierced the heavy black smoke. Punchy grabbed a 5-year-old girl with her hair on fire. He snuffed the flames with a couple of whacks of his hand, then snatched a naked baby, wrapped the infant in his jacket, and passed him out the door. The Gallo Bucket Brigade shuttled all 6 children down the steps and into the thick arms of Mrs. Gatto. 3 fire engines from the 32nd Battalion roared onto President Street, but the fire was out. Larry and Punchy had already tossed the burning mattress out of the window. Back from a trip to buy milk at the grocery store, Sista Biaz, seeing all 6 of her children safe and sound, dropped her brown bags and wept. "They saved my children," she cried in Spanish. "They are wonderful boys. God bless them." Kid Blast made the gang empty out their pockets. "We were going to go out soliciting some more," he told reporters, "but then we would have got pinched for extortion." Mrs. Biaz got 50 clams. She hugged the Gallos, posing for pictures in Mrs. Gatto's luncheonette. Blast leaned down to put his arm around her. She kissed him on the cheek. The shutter clicked. "Don't try to make heroes out of us," Blast told the news cameras. "We're not heroes. We only done what any red-blooded American boys would do. Do you see any horns here? I got no horns. We're not animals. We're just human beings trying to get along." The tale of the Great Fire went nationwide, picked up as far as the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Fan mail poured into the dormitory. A kook from North Carolina wrote, "Hello to the Gallo gang. I read of your act of bravery in saving 6 children in a fire. That was a great thing for all of you to do. With the good you have in you and the desire to help those in need, surely the fire department, the police department, and your neighborhood need you, and they could find something for you to do. I hope to read more and good things about you in the future. The aged, the blind, mothers such as Mrs. Biaz must need young men like you to read to them, to babysit and take them for walks. Be brave and ask the police and fire department if there isn't something they can find for you to do." Admirers from the Midwest sent over a television set so the gang could watch The Untouchables on Thursday nights. Housewives baked goods. Militia nuts sent advice on how to best fight guerrilla warfare. The FBI sent dispatches to Hoover warning, "Considerable favorable publicity concerning the Gallos is expected to result from this action. Subjects should be considered armed and dangerous." Back at the Longshore restroom, the Gallos checked themselves out on the front pages. Big Lollipop poked a pencil through the bullet holes in his fedora and chatted on the payphone. "Hey, get off that phone," snapped Punchy. "What if there's another fire? How are we going to go put it out?" "Without crummy luck, we'll probably get a ticket for fighting the fire without a license." "If Joey was here," said Blast, "he would have been the first one up to the fire." The Life feature on the gang war was shelved in lieu of an article entitled, "All Right Already, The Mob is Heroes." Instead of looking like tawdry gangsters, the Gallos graced the pages of America's biggest magazine as saviors of children, replacing the Mercury astronauts as national heroes. The issue hit the newsstands in Miami Beach, the snake and rat-infested mangrove swamp turned sparkling resort. Don Carlo Gambino lounged on the sun deck outside room 218 at the Golden Gate Hotel. He'd been careful not to exert himself, save his trips to the early bird special at the Rascal House restaurant, perhaps sneaking the spicy lobster fra diavolo past his wife. No dancing or anything that could get him worked up. The only cloud on the horizon was the trouble of his close colleague, Joe Profazzi. Gambino's heart weighed on the strain. Recovered after a bout of smoke poisoning, Larry received a proposition from the big boys. Certain parties in Miami Beach had taken steps to remove Old Man Profazzi, rebuild his family, and make Larry a boss. But in order for the plan to proceed, Larry would have to make peace with Junior. Unthinkable, given Junior's rotten behavior over the past year. But Larry brooded over the Miami Beach proposition in cold logic. A red-blooded American, Larry accepted the dirty realities of big business. The Shanghai wasn't personal, and declared a truce with Junior. With no army hunting them down, the Gallo gang stepped out of their long winter hibernation. Springtime blossomed in Red Hook. Weeks wore on while the big boys maneuvered, but Larry was patient. In spite of the truce, Larry refused to leave the security of President Street. He didn't completely trust Junior and wasn't going to give anyone a second chance at killing him. He enjoyed the company of his father and Kid Blast without worrying about his ulcer. He played violin and looked to the next act. "I ain't gonna be doing what I'm doing for the rest of my life," he told Inspector Martin, still keeping watch. "You may not think so, but life is made for finer things. One day I'm gonna retire. I don't want to be like so many fellas I know who retire and they can't do nothing. When I retire, I'm gonna be cultured. I'm going to sit back and enjoy. "I got a little pain in my chest," Don Carlo Gambino told a friend on the telephone, but managed to make it back up to New York on March 28, 1962, scooting up the eastern seaboard while situated in Car F, drawing room B52, on the Silver Meteor. The plastic angel outside the entrance of his quiet old house looked mercifully onto Ocean Parkway in Gravesend, Brooklyn. A wrought iron fence wrapped around the tiny front yard. Old Man Gambino amused himself by puttering around the flower garden and pruning his tomato bushes. Small and silver-haired, with a beak nose, he spent every afternoon at Ferrara's in Little Italy, ordering espresso and his favorite pastry. He carefully picked from the fruit stands on Mulberry Street and drove home in the Lincoln Continental to his wife. He owned the Peggy Ann Dress Company in Peckville, Pennsylvania. He seemed like a kindly old man, a ruse honed and perfected over centuries in his native Palermo. "Joe Profazzi has been the father of his family for many glorious years," said Don Carlo, addressing his fellow Dons. "But it is my duty to tell the Commission that for the sake of peace and to avoid more trouble, perhaps it would be best if he retires." "It takes a strong and vigorous leader to restore peace," added Don Tommaso, addressing Profazzi by his traditional name, Don Pedro. "Why should the serenity of Don Pedro be disturbed? He should be resting, leaving the work to others, to the young." Don Peppino held his tongue. He had known Profazzi since the days of the great feasts at Don Vincenzo's farmhouse, a time to share stories of boyhood in the sun-baked hills of Palermo. Tongues loosened by bottles of wine, the Dons would sing odes to loved ones and laments for their mothers. There were bawdy jokes and Sicilian toasts, a test of wit at which Don Peppino was best, composing such rhymes as, "Friends, if after this meal I die in Broocolino, I ask to be buried with my mandolino." "Don Pedro should stay," spoke Peppino, defending his old friend Profazzi. He was ready to back up his words with guns, even if it meant waging war against Don Carlo, a degenerate, as he was known among his peers for having married his first cousin. "A father has his pride," continued Peppino. "A father doesn't like to leave until he has bequeathed peace to his family." The Commission gave Don Pedro, dying of cancer, full license to do so. Sidge, the money man, shuffled over to President Street to deliver the ultimatum. If the Gallos commit acts of violence, the Profazzi group will immediately retaliate, and not only against the Gallos and their men, but against their wives and children. The Cuckoo's Nest. Taking out his spiral-bound, nifty steno notebook, Joey began writing in pencil. Nothing is new to me. I have foreseen and am prepared for it all. Mastering a speed reading technique, Joey devoured 6 or 8 books a day at Attica, shipped in from the 8th Street bookshop. He stayed up all night reading philosophy by the dim light that shone through his one small window. Things exist when I feel they exist, okay? Realized Joey. Me. I am the world. The world is in me. Good, bad, ugly, beautiful. It's all there. Everything. I am alive. I feel it. Therefore, it exists. And if it exists, it's not good. It's not bad. It just is. Joey matched wits with Wilde, brooded with Schopenhauer, reasoned with Kant, and was enlightened by Voltaire. He filled his nifty steno with quotes from Nietzsche. The baits of fools who prefer the company of the unprotesting dead and dare not live dangerously in the perilous future. He quoted Spinoza on death. A free man thinks of nothing less than death, and his wisdom is a meditation not of death, but of life. He copied out epigrams from 18th century humorist Thomas Hood. He had to be a lively Hood for a livelihood. He devoured books in a heated love affair. The passion of the intellect, penciled Joey, which can be as carnal and ecstatic as the rapture of the flesh. When Jeffy took the 8-hour drive upstate to see him, Joey refused her at the gate, preferring to communicate in passionate love letters. His poetry lifted up to the stars, filled with strange references to an unholy 3, the scorpion's sting, the ice-battering ram, and the pagan goat, joining forces with the laugh of a black Christ. His prose was infused with Arabian Nights imagery steeped in death. Informants gave him 2 weeks to live. Larry warned Joey against touching any of the food brought in from the outside. The Profazzis had connections behind the walls. They could get him any time. Tabloids reported a plot to poison the steam table in the mess hall. For his own protection, Joey decided to get himself keep-locked, a form of solitary confinement on the block, which meant separation from the general population under close watch. He made a habit of needling the prison guards, the hacks. "You have to obey the rules and regulations like everybody else," said the deputy warden. "I don't believe in obeying rules and regulations," said Joey. When the keep lock ended, Joey was thrown out of his cell to mix with the general population. Mafioso were at the top of the heap, leaving Joey to search the Attica Yard, Times Square, for backup. The Irish didn't want anything to do with him. Puerto Ricans stuck to themselves. Anybody who wasn't in a gang was a punk. Joey fronted the money for a black nationalist gambling ring, got tight with the brothers, and got a lot of attention from the hacks for breaking the color barrier. They gave it to him good in the shower, where prisoners stood naked in line to get a shot of water, just enough to lather up. The hacks turned up the heat for Joey. He jumped back at the scalding water. "You know I'm gonna win," taunted Joey. "And you know why I'm gonna win? Because I've got more money than you." The Attica barber shop was a powder keg. Half the barbers were black, half white. Segregated lines led to the prison barber chair, inciting unrest among the black militants. Half the guys there hadn't been aware that they'd been making a choice about their barber before, remembered Willie Sutton, doing hard time for his infamous bank robberies. But boy, all of a sudden the prison was filled with civil libertarians screaming about the sacred barber-client relationship. To avoid having a civil uprising on their hands, Attica officials ordered one line with a next open chair policy, but white prisoners still refused to sit for a black barber, even if his chair was open, especially given the edict of the Klansmen in B Block. Standing in the front of the line in the midst of the controversy, Joey waited until a black barber's chair opened up. The next day in the metal shop, a big guy warned Joey that the Klan was after him. Joey jumped the messenger and got downgraded to punishment detail in A Block, where the Klansman was being keep-locked for reportedly putting a crowbar to an inmate's head. Joey swore the Klansman kept taunting, "I'll get you, Gallo." Walking down the long, empty hallway on the way to the mess, Joey approached the Klansman's cell and saw a bright red tag hanging outside, indicating that the Klansman was supposed to be keep-locked. He wasn't. "The guy's screaming," said Joey, telling the story of how he got jumped with a shiv. "The guards think it's me, so nobody shows up for some time. Meanwhile, I'm back in my cell with the door closed and his ear in my mouth. Finally, one of the guards comes, and he hears them talking outside. Then one of them comes in and says, 'Okay, Gallo, where's the ear?' In Joey's version, he spit the ear into the toilet and flushed. Ordered to Reception B for observation, Joey had time to replay the ins and outs of the paranoid B movie running through his brain. Everybody was out to get him. Bounty hunters, Profazzis, the Klansman who threw a burning cross in his cell, the hacks, and in particular the Nazi, the guard who set Joey up for death by leaving the Klansman's door open instead of keep locking it. Payback for Joey throwing gasoline on the volatile barbershop situation. The prison wanted him dead and crazy, refusing him any psychiatric care. Nobody was observing him. Joey felt like an animal in Reception B, less than human, with the same bucket for his waste that was used to clean his tin dinner plate. Sitting in isolation in his 6x11 cell, he lived out a hell worse than Satra had envisioned in No Exit. His best chance of survival was a clean slate at a new prison. Joey furnished an appeal to get transferred from Attica on the grounds that his constitutional right against cruel and unusual punishment was being violated by a deliberate and concerted plan and conspiracy to keep prisoner from inalienable right to select his acquaintances, whether they are white or colored. The Post picked up the story and added the headline, "Trouble again. Now he's suing the warden." The bad press didn't endear Joey to the hacks. He swore that a prison official told him, "You nigger-loving bastard, you'll never live to get the warden into court." Hard-wired against authority, Joey feared he'd snap on a hack, finally giving them reason to beat him to death. To keep his cool, Joey invented his own sort of primal scream therapy. He lay face down on his cot, buried his face in his pillow, and let out a silent scream at the thought of his enemies while he choked on his blanket. Boned up on the latest from the 8th Street bookshop, including rogue psychiatrist R.D. Laing, author of Sanity, Madness, and the Family, Joey followed the twists and turns of how bouts of psychotic behavior were journeys that led to blindingly clear insight. Super sane, Joey knew if the guards spying on him through the peephole caught him screaming into his pillow, twisting his blanket, they'd send him off to the nut house for sure. Matawan, the big house of shock therapy, everything detailed in the village hit One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. After 5 months under observation without so much as a walk around the yard, Joey turned into a political prisoner, a victim of a conspiracy by the NYPD, the FBI, and the Kennedys, even though Bobby owed him for keeping the mob out of his brother's assassination. In his report to the Warren Commission, the committee investigating the shooting of JFK in Dallas, Sergeant Ralph Salerno listed the ins and outs of the Gallo revolt and concluded, "It is extremely unlikely that the National Commission of La Cosa Nostra was involved in any plan to kill the president. It was facing strong internal dissension and other problems and does not appear to have been in a position to undertake such a major act." Joey made everybody on the Underworld Commission too crazy to pay any attention to a big conspiracy. 3 days after the commission gave Joe Profazzi the vote of confidence, on Sunday night, April 8, 1962, Joey's old pal, village boss Tony Bender, got dressed in his 9-room stucco home in Jersey. He affixed the gold cufflinks on his monogrammed white shirt, slipped on his dark silk mohair suit, and fastened his French wristwatch. Bender took a last look at his wife, Edna, through his horn-rimmed glasses. He said he was going out to buy cigarettes. "You'd better put on your coat," said Edna. "It's chilly." "I'm only going to be a few minutes. Besides, I'm wearing my thermal underwear." Bender stepped out into the night. A squeegee lay on the floor of his new black Cadillac sedan with red interior. After a brutal winter, he'd gotten the garden ready for spring the weekend before. He prepared for summer by cleaning the swimming pool. He had hoped to spend more time in his woodworking shop. He turned on the ignition and drove out onto Palisades Avenue, high on a bluff overlooking the New York City skyline, taking his one-way ride to nowhere. According to underworld legend, Tony Bender was in the Cadillac when it got crushed. As Joey put it, nobody was ever going to put Joey Gallo in a Tony Bender machine. Tackling the law library, Joey obsessed over case law citations and legal journals. With the help of pro bono activist lawyers drawn to Joey's case on his penchant for civil rights, Joey built his appeal around the enormous amount of press in the months before his trial, much of which he had generated himself. Jeffy helped him from home by calling Newsday on Long Island and asking for clippings, adding them to the Life magazine articles, a story in Time, Joey's daily headlines in the Post, Daily News, and New York Mirror, and the big feature from that rat, Sidney Slater, who had just sold Joey's story to the Saturday Evening Post for 20 G's. The amount of publicity given to the defendant rivaled that given to a presidential candidate, his lawyer argued in the petition. The news media gave so much attention and play to prejudicing the rights of the defendant that legitimate news items, such as the international situation and the atomic bomb, were displaced by headlines concerning the defendant. Joey's appeal rose up the ranks until March 1964, when the U.S. Supreme Court refused to consider it. Searching for any way to buck the system, Joey saw no choice but to go the obvious route. Arguing for his own insanity, Joey compiled an appeal to prove he was crazy at the time of his trial. He combed through the transcripts for any evidence of mental disturbance and realized his genius. Before getting shipped off to the big house, he had handed the press a handwritten statement deriding the state for forgetting that there are other values in our society which must be balanced against every American citizen. Joey quoted Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who said, "It is a fair summary of history to say that the safeguards of liberty have frequently been forged in controversies involving not very nice people." Joey had yet to realize that liberty didn't come into play when you were Crazy Joe. If he just did his time quietly, he'd be out sooner. But if he stopped fighting, he couldn't win. The lessons of Sun Tzu's The Art of War taught him that. In Mao, Joey learned that all power comes from the barrel of a gun. In Lenin, Joey learned that the revolution must strike twice. There was always a gap between action and total upheaval. Joey began to write a little black book. Pulling out a new nifty steno, he neatly copied, in ink, a Platonic dialogue between Mao and Lenin, composing a heated debate on revolution. Lenin: "Without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement." Mao: "Knowledge starts with practice, reaches the theoretical plane via practice." In his own war against the oppressor, Joey struck strong first blows in kidnappings, terrorism against the establishment, and strong displays of force and solidarity, but the real work was yet to come. Comrades were rising up against bourgeois oppressors around the world. The gallows needed a piece of the action in the global upheaval. Joey added his own aphorism to his notebook. Joey: "Theory becomes aimless if it is not connected with revolutionary practice, just as practice gropes in the dark if its path is not illuminated by revolutionary theory." Joey tracked down Willie Sutton in Times Square. The revolution could use Slick Willie. The Brooklyn folk hero stuck up banks during the Great Depression, was an expert at busting out of prison, and knew how to live underground, earning him a spot on the FBI Most Wanted list. Joey urged him to read Mao. "You get your revolution, and what are you going to do with bank robbers?" asked Willie, chain-smoking rolled-up Bull Durhams. "There'd be no banks." "To hell with your revolution, then, Joe." Jeffy left Attica, worried sick. Joey was driving the prison staff nuts. If he didn't cut out the antics, they'd send him to Manawan and zap out his brain for good. "Listen, Larry, he's losing control. He's really going this time. We got to get him to a psychiatrist." "If you know somebody and want to send him up, go ahead. I'll take care of it. But remember, Joey never did a thing in his life he didn't plan well in advance." Jeffy sent her shrink Dr. Bruce, a young Ivy Leaguer and protege of her old Reichian therapist, Dr. Albert. Dr. Bruce was led through door after door into the depths of Attica. He ended up in an airless room with a small table, 2 chairs, and a naked bulb hanging from the high ceiling. It reminded Dr. Bruce of a scene out of Kafka. A cordon of 4 guards escorted Joey into the room and locked him in. Dr. Bruce kept on his game face. Joey was a famous criminal. Dr. Bruce was a professional who could be trusted to give the prison an honest evaluation of number 62167's mental state. Physically, Joey looked awful, pale and anemic. The prison blues hung on him. Dr. Bruce noted that his eyes looked like burning coals. Joey took the pad and pencil from the table and scribbled a note. "This room is bugged." "Doc, I'm glad you brought your instruments with you because I really need a checkup and I don't trust these prison doctors." The doctor put his stethoscope to Joey's heart. He checked, but he couldn't find any bruises. "You're not going to find any black and blue marks," said Joey. He leaned to whisper. "They do it with pillows." Dr. Bruce held Joey's tongue with a wooden dispenser. Joey brought up Reich's mass psychology of fascism, the violence woven into the American fabric, and the amoral behavior juxtaposed with the Protestant work ethic on which the country was founded. Dr. Bruce recommended to the prison commission that, from a psychological standpoint, Joey's chances of a more successful accommodation, from both the prisoners' and the authorities' point of view, would be considerably greater at any of the other state prisons than they are at Attica. The commissioner was in full agreement. The Commission. Only the Almighty had greater pull in South Brooklyn. Every Sunday, Profazzi paid him tribute. The Don gave generously to church charities. In a Bath Beach church, he looked down upon worshippers from the painted ceiling, his face rendered as one of the saints. In another of the local churches, a jeweled crown had been stolen off the Madonna statue, only to be returned by order of Profazzi. Word on the street was that the thief got strangled with rosary beads. The Don had always been religious, but grew closer with the Almighty during his illness. He prayed that his nun sister would help him gain admittance into the Knights of Malta. He ordered a hand-carved replica of St. Peter's Basilica to be installed in his private chapel at 12 Pines. Some prankster drew nipples on one of the saints. The Don passed, quietly, of liver cancer in the late hours of June 6, 1962, at Southside Hospital on Long Island. The funeral was a modest affair with 200 mourners, duly noted by agents of the FBI and NYPD, who scribbled down the license plates of the limos parked outside at the wake. After 3 decades of ruling Brooklyn, the Don was buried in Queens at St. John's Cemetery, entombed in an enormous Romanesque mausoleum in view of the cloister. "What are you guys so broken up about?" asked Inspector Martin. "From what you told me, he was a heartless, murdering old man." "Don't talk that way, Mr. Martin," said Larry. "If you can't say something good about the dead, don't say anything." President Street was in mourning, but Tony Schatz didn't shed a tear. It had been almost 3 years since that cold November evening in 1959 when he had chauffeured his father, Frankie Schatz, in the gray Cadillac Imperial to Cardiello's Bar and Grill in Flatbush. Frankie brought a round for everybody. Everybody shook his hand and gave him a hearty send-off. 2 men in topcoats, bandanas, and fedoras blasted him back into the bar. It was a shame. Everybody loved the Bensonhurst numbers man, a nice guy whose only crime was being late on the Don's Pizzu. Packing up his belongings, Tony Schatz headed out to President Street. He was a real fighter, big and bald, formerly a fullback at his high school, St. Francis Prep, and part of the 3rd Marine Division at the Battle of Guam. But communal living began to take its toll. Tony started sleeping alone at 49 President Street, 1 building removed from the rest of the gang. He wore shades to hide the dark circles under his eyes. He had plenty of time to worry about his liver, which he knew he damaged by drinking too much liquor at the Coco Poodle. He downed vitamins. With the Don dead, justice was served. Tony Schatz wasn't sure what came next. The underworld buzzed how Larry would be the next Don of the Profazzi family. After a year of fighting, Larry had earned respect from Bensonhurst to Bath Beach, from the Rinaldi brothers to the Bat Boys, from the Sidge to Joe Colombo's boys on 86th Street. He made peace with Junior. He deserved an old-world title, but as the weeks passed, the next Don Lorenzo was still the same old Larry, stuck in the same old story on President Street. Morning after morning, Tony Schatz woke up alone, popped his vitamin pills, and put on his shades, leaving him to consider the offer from the fat man, old man Profazzi's brother-in-law. Emissaries promised Tony's widowed mother that all would go well if her son left the gallows. Otherwise, he'd die a nobody, like the rest of the outcasts on President Street. She went to the dormitory to pick up his shotgun. Tony walked out for good and took half of the gallows with him. "Who needs him?" growled Larry. Good and liquored, Larry ordered the last remaining troops to pile into 2 cars and head for the Copa, hit men be damned. Yelling at the waiters for more drinks, they banged their fists at the table, rip-roaring drunk. They jumped up shouting, knocking the underside of the round tables with their thighs, sending silverware, plates, and glasses crashing to the floor. The head waiter told the gallows to quit making trouble for themselves. Larry wouldn't listen. It was his first night out in the real world, after a year of being self-imprisoned in the dormitory. He'd spent all his time sitting around, smoking cigarettes, and trying to figure out the ins and outs of the brothers' situation, waging motives and considering the power plays, what the gallows could get away with and what they could not. Joey kept pushing him to act, to let the gallows off the leash and sick him, but Larry held back, hoping he could figure out the answers before taking the gallows on a death course. He wanted to make good on his promise to the commission, no violence, knowing one day he'd be brought up before the elders to be approved as Don of the Profazzi family. Larry didn't want to answer for broken promises. He didn't want a lot of blood on his hands. Drinking his fill, Larry hurled insults at all those who'd betrayed him, wishing them damned for eternity, to feel the pain of the iced circle of hell. Larry slunk back into his chair, limp, then staggered up and out of the Copa, leading the rest of the gang back to the dormitory. The next day, the telephone was disconnected. Weeks later, the electricity was turned off, converting the Gallo funhouse into a dark fortress of broken dreams and loaded shotguns. In his months keeping guard over President Street, Inspector Martin gained no love for the gallows, but reached a kind of respect. He had never taken up the invitation to share their spaghetti dinners, but now sat at the kitchen table at the dim dormitory, talking quietly with one of the Gallo boys, as if we were in a holy place on a sad occasion. "Why don't you guys go home now?" "They'll kill us." "Who will kill you?" "We're losers. We got beat." "All right, so you did. Go home. Forget it. Get a job or something." "That's okay with me. Somebody's got to die, though. You think they'll forget what we done?" "You could leave town. Start over some other place." "No, I only know this place. Anyhow, I'm with Larry. I gotta stay." "Look," a fat man emissary told one of the gallows. "Larry's in bad trouble. He's gotta go. Stay close to him. When you get the word that he's to be hit, you set it up, you hear?" The gallows were trapped, desperate as the junkyard dogs that howled in Red Hook. There was no more opera on President Street. The illusion was gone for Larry, leaving only the squalor. He had nothing. He had nothing to lose. Shortly after New Year's, 1963, Junior Persico stepped out of his bar on New Utrecht Avenue to his parked Cadillac. He checked around the car to see if anything looked suspicious, then turned on the ignition. Hiding out within eyeshot, the Gallo demolition man flipped the switch to the black box slipped under the hood. "You could feel the explosion right inside your chest," said a witness. "Nobody could have lived through it." The Cadillac launched into the air, then bounced back down on its tires. Junior walked away and brushed himself off. In another attempt, a Gallo tossed a grenade at one of Junior's bars, but it bounced off a window. The Gallo picked it up to try again. The grenade went off, blowing his hand to shreds. It made him a big hit at the longshore restroom, where he took off his prosthetic hand, put it on the edge of the pool table, set the cue on it, and knocked in the 8-ball, this time with dead aim. Undeterred, the Gallos attached bombs to their remote control model airplanes and sent them into Junior's turf on a kamikaze raid, but the plan didn't fly. In the early hours of May 19, a Gallo on a rooftop staked out Junior's latest hideout on Bond Street. Inside a green panel truck, lined with thick fiberglass on the rear and sides and mattresses on the floor to muffle the shots, 2 Gallos lay in wait with M1 military rifles, watching through the one-way windows. Shortly before 7 in the morning, Junior stepped out into the daylight and slipped into his car, on the move and strapped with his Lugers. The panel truck cut him off on the narrow street. M1s blasted from the back window. Bullets shattered the windshield. One bullet hit Junior in the shoulder. Another hit him in the left arm, damaging it for life. According to underworld legend, the bullet continued up his body until it pierced the underside of his cheek and landed in his mouth like a pinball, leaving Junior to spit it out and with his good hand it over to the NYPD detective arriving on the scene. Before the ambulance carted him away, Detective Seidman told the EMS men that he wanted to talk to Junior for a second. Junior's eyes were swollen and blood-caked, though he could still make out Seidman peering over him and asking, "Who the hell did this to you, Carmine?" Junior spit in Seidman's face. Seidman spit back. Ali Baba returned to shore after his 40 days at sea cooking for the American export lines. "I've been everywhere in the world," said Baba. "There's no place like New York." Profazzis shot him down on the Hoboken waterfront. Baba was revenged 3 weeks later in Bay Ridge after one of the turncoats who had walked out on President Street, Joe Batts, was shot in his car while waiting for the green light. Profazzis revenged Batts by the afternoon, shooting Louis Cadillac in the parking lot of a Long Island shopping mall. By the day's end, the Gallo-Profazzi war toll had reached 6 wounded, 2 missing, and 12 dead. 7 had been killed in the past 2 months, the result of the fat man's kill-them-all contract on the gallows, paid for by skimming $100 a month from his gambling operations. Brought in for questioning by the Suffolk County DA on the shooting of Louis Cadillac, the fat man clutched his chest and acted dazed and confused, then returned to the big house on his East Islip estate. Installing phone stations throughout the 14 rooms of his home, the fat man kept constant tabs with security to check for any Gallo who might have slipped past the electric fence and the vicious German shepherds. "It was just like The Godfather," said Detective Bartles, "except with big dogs instead of tomato bushes." Starting the ignition of his car from the kitchen via remote control, the fat man braced for an explosion. Hearing none, he walked down the hill to the parked car, a safe distance from the house. The engine purred. The fat man sat in the back seat and put the shotgun from the garage across his lap. Even the AC couldn't stave off the heat, all over the fat man since a sneaky Life cameraman popped a full-page photo of him for that long-delayed cover piece on the gang war entitled Death Throes of the Gallo Mob. They are punks. They are scared. They hide in fear of other hoods, and when they do emerge, it is with the fright of the hunted animal. Once they were a swaggering gang which killed for hire, assaulted the innocent, and dared to rebel against the vicious hierarchy of the U.S. crime syndicate. Now their insurrection has failed, suppressed with equal callousness in a 4-year war whose tawdry casualty list has dirtied New York with gangster blood. But the gallows didn't fail. They didn't cave. They fought fire with fire in a throwback to the notorious Castellamaresa War, a gangland feud to cap the lawless days of Prohibition. The fat man remembered it well. On one side of the war was the pig Mazzaria, and on the other the wily Maranzano, so strong he could snap a man's neck between his thumbs. Keeping 2 pistols and a dagger in his belt, Marenzano dashed through enemy territory and fired a machine gun, swivel-mounted in the back seat of his bulletproof limo. Tabloids printed the lurid tales, quenching the public thirst for blood. The notoriety brought unwanted attention to the Italian underworld. It was bad for business, and above all, Lucky Luciano was a businessman. Excusing himself to go to the bathroom at a Coney Island restaurant, he left Anastasia to serve the main course to Mazzaria. Marenzano got it next, killed by IRS agents in his midtown office who raided with knives instead of a tax lien. Across the country, the old order was mythically gutted in the second night of the Sicilian Vespers. When the blood dried, a new order emerged. Capone from Chicago, Magaddino from Buffalo, and from New York City, 5 who had proven themselves as men of honor: Luciano, Mangano, Lucchesi, Bonanno, Profazzi. They forged the commission, bringing order to the underworld until the gallows came along. The commission refused to approve the fat man as Don of the Profazzi family on the grounds that he could not stop the Gallo War, but the fat man knew the truth. Don Carlo Gambino wanted the Profazzis at war. He wanted the Life magazine articles, the daily headlines, and the 6 o'clock news. He used the publicity as grounds to oust Profazzi and replace him with his errand boy, Tony Bender, thrown to the lions when he no longer served his purpose. Now Don Carlo used the Gallo War as reason to keep the fat man from his rightful place as successor to the Profazzi family. Gambino's lust to rule the commission had infected the honored ways of tradition, spawned in Palermo that Easter week of 1282, when tax agents from the House of Bourbon handcuffed the faithful on their way to evening prayer. A virgin was raped behind the church. Her mother ran screaming through the dirt-caked streets. "Mafia! Mafia!" Rising to serve, a man of honor gutted the filthy Bourbon rapist, an act of defiance that lived on in legend as Night of the Sicilian Vespers. Ready to blast New York City back to the 13th century, the fat man felt the weight of the shotgun on his belly. The clock ticked at the Brentwood station of the Long Island Railroad. Bill Bonanno, son of Don Peppino, sat at the wheel. The train arrived from Penn Station. Sally the Sheik exited and headed for the car. "Is everything set?" asked the fat man from the back seat. "Yeah, everything's set." "Okay, start."